Converting JavaScript to TypeScript is what we're going to do today on this Blue Collar Coder. I'm Jack Harrington, at Jaher on Twitter. This is the beginning of the Blue Collar Coder series on TypeScript. I'm really excited about it. Glad you're here. We're going to do it a little bit differently than other TypeScript courses you may have seen, which kind of focus on the syntax of the language. We're going to be a bit more practical and start off by just changing JavaScript to TypeScript in files and learn TypeScript that way, because that's in reality a lot of what we're going to do is be working on existing projects which we're going to port to TypeScript. So a couple of things to keep in mind as you watch through all of these videos around TypeScript, and that's that first, does TypeScript help me better communicate my intentions as an engineer when it comes to my code and how it's used? That's something that we're going to be looking to TypeScript to do for us. So how does it do that? And then secondly, does it help me check the code? That's another important aspect of it as well. So how does the tooling help me check the code for correctness? All right, I've spoken enough. Let's just jump into converting our first JavaScript file. Okay, so our project starts with these two files that you can get off the link provided in the description. The first is test.js, and it imports a bunch of functions out of a file called basic types, and then runs a bunch of tests on them, essentially, just to see how they work. Then there's basic types, which actually has the functions. Now, both of these are JavaScript files. The first is a cat. It takes a string in a variable called animal, and then compares that to the value cat, and if it is a cat, then it returns true, otherwise it returns false. Add numbers adds two numbers together, A and B, and returns a result. Introduction formats a name as a string and then returns it as hello name. Introduce person does the same thing as introduction, but it in turn console logs that output as opposed to returning it as a string. Dump object takes a type, which I guess is a string here, and then an object which it then stringifies. And then dump string or number takes a value, I guess that's either a string or a number, and then returns a string with value and then that value. All right, back over in test.js, we import those and then we run them. So let's try it out. Let's run this under node. So is a cat on cat returns true, and on a dog returns false. Adding 1 and 2 makes 3, that makes sense. And then 1 and Jack gives you 1 Jack, which is correct in JavaScript world, but is obviously not what we want because add numbers should just add numbers. Introduction and introduce person, return hello Jack and hello Molly. And then dump object, I see that takes a string, and we put in there object for some reason. And then it says object, and then gives us the stringified version of that object, which is just open and close braces. And then dump string or number gives us that value foo and value 10. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is add TypeScript to this project. And to do that, I'm going to use yarn add TypeScript and TS node and in development mode. So TypeScript is the TypeScript language, and TS node is a helper command line module that gives us TS-node as opposed to just node. So if you want to run a TypeScript file, you can run TS node and then give it the name of the TypeScript file, which would normally kind of not make node happy. So TS node is going to do the TypeScript compilation and then run node on it. So that's created a package JSON and a yarn lock for us. So now let's do TS node on test.js. And we can see that TS node, when it comes to JS files, it runs those just fine. So you can run TS node on either JS or TS files, no problem. So the first thing in our conversion is to change test.js to test.ts. TS is the extension for TypeScript. And we'll run that again. And we can see that it doesn't like the require. So the first thing we need to do is change the require to an import. And now it works just fine. So it has test.ts, which is now a TypeScript file, which is importing basic types.js, which is a JavaScript file, and it's working just fine. So that's really cool. And we can start to see some of the functionality in VS Code. For example, if I type in isAcat here, and then open parentheses, it tells me what the signature of isAcat is. So isAcat, in this case, takes an animal and returns a Boolean. And that animal has the any type. So in TypeScript, you specify types by doing colon and then the type. So in this case, colon any means that it will take pretty much anything in there. Could be an object, could be null, could be an array, could be a string, could be a number, could be anything. And it returns a Boolean. So true or false. So let's see if we can do better. Let's see if we can make isAcat better defined. The first thing we need to do is change basic types to basictypes.ts. And then we'll run it again. And it's not happy about this because we do module.exports. It wants to see export. So let's go change out these to export. And now I've got to fix up the add numbers, as well as the introduction. And there you go. Now let's try it again. And looks good. All right. And we still haven't defined any types. We haven't actually used any real TypeScript. We've just changed the extensions to .ts and changed required import and module.exports to export. So we'll take a look at isAcat again. And again, it returns animal any and Boolean. So TypeScript hasn't done anything for us yet. So now we have to define what isAcat is. So to define that animal is a string, all we need to do is type colon and then string. Now if we go back, we can see that isAcat now accepts a string. And if we put a number in there, then we get a problem. So let's click on the Problems tab. And we can see that TypeScript is now telling us right in VS Code that the argument of type number is not assignable to the parameter of type string. So we've said that isAcat takes a string, and we've given it a number. Now if we go and try to TS node this, it doesn't run because it first does that check. It first checks to make sure that all of our assertions about the types that we want are valid before it passes them on to node. And if that fails, then it doesn't run the script. So let's get rid of that and run it again, and it runs just fine. So we've said that isAcat takes a string, we've provided it with just strings, and now it runs. So let's go and add a script and let's compile this. So another thing you probably want to do is learn how to compile TypeScript back into JavaScript. So we'll create a new script called compile. And use TSC, which is the TypeScript compiler. And that's brought in by the TypeScript package. And then we'll give it star.ts to say anything in this directory with a .ts on it you want to compile. And so let's run that. And it runs just fine. And now we can see what it looks like on the outside. So this is actually the JavaScript that was created for test. So honestly, it's pretty clean as transpiled code goes. Here's basic types, and basically looks actually a lot like what we did before, but there's no returns in there. It's just not quite as well formatted, but it looks fine. And we can now run this using regular node. We can say node test.js, and everything runs just fine. Of course, that is bringing in basictypes.js and not basictypes.ts. So everything we'd be running there is just the JavaScript that's been compiled. Okay, so to finish off isAcat, I'm going to actually fully specify each one of these functions. So let's put on there Boolean, because that's what this is going to return. Animal equals cat is going to return a Boolean. So add numbers is fairly clear, right? We want numbers in there. So let's go and specify that A is a number, and B is a number, and that it returns a number. So now back in test.js, we can see that it's identified that problem that we saw before, that I was adding numbers where I gave it 1 and 2, and then I was adding numbers where I gave it 1 and Jack is not a valid number, so it's now giving us a problem. And if we run tsnode again, it's now telling us that those arguments are invalid. So now let's compile. So we do get an error, but has it created any JS files? Let's test that. So I'm going to delete these two .js files. And then run the compile again. And again, we get an error. But we also get the JS files. So that's something to watch out for when it comes to TypeScript compilation. The fact that TypeScript generated JS files doesn't mean that your code passed the checks. Both of those operations are run in parallel, and they don't block each other. So that's really important to watch out for, and don't rely on the fact that you've got JS files as a sign that your TS code is valid. And you can still run that JS code using Node, even though it's got that error. So let's comment out this line. So let's continue on with our conversion. Introduction is going to take a name. That name is a string. Introduced person is the same. So introduction returns a string because a string template returns a string. But what does introduced person return? So one way to find out is to go back into test.js and then just type in introduced person, open up the parentheses, and now we see that we actually get the type signature for us. TypeScript has inferred from the expressions inside of that function, which is just console log, that the return of introduced person is a void. Now, if you're not familiar with this, void comes out of the C++ world, and it basically means that there's no return value. So let's get rid of that, go back in here, and then give it type of void. Okay, so let's take a look at dump object. And we can see before that it took a string, but that object could be anything. Any value that TypeScript doesn't know about is defaulted to the type of any. So type is a string, and object is any. And the output of this is a string. And finally, dump string or number. So how are we going to deal with this? We actually have two different types of values that you can send to this. So we could say string, and then go back into test.js, and we can see that dump string or number 10 doesn't like, because that's not a string. We can make it a number, and go back into test.js, and now it doesn't like the string. So what you can do is you can use the pipe to say it is a number or a string. And then finally, it returns a string. So now we are fully qualified. Every one of our functions in here specifies its inputs and its outputs. But what I want to do is also add a nice little helper module called type coverage. Again, in development mode. Now we'll go back into package.json, and we'll add a script for type coverage, and then call type coverage. Now let's run that. And we can see that we've got 63 out of 65 specified types, which is interesting, 96.92%. So what are we missing? So we can also add detail onto this. And it gives us a file, so let's click on that. And so what it's telling us is that any is not good. So we've specified any, which was defaulted, so we really didn't need to specify that. So is there a safer version of any? And it turns out there is. It's unknown. Unknown is actually a lot stricter in terms of what you can do with it than any, so it's considered safer. Obviously, having the right type is the best thing to do, but when you don't have that, unknown is very good. So let's run our type coverage again. And now we've got 100% type coverage. Everything is fully specified. There's even a VS Code extension for this, type coverage, that you can install. And then when I type any again, you can see that I get a little yellow squiggly, and that's telling me that that's not good. And if I don't specify anything at all, again, it's any, so that's not good either. So unknown is the best thing to do here. So there you have it, a fully qualified JavaScript to TypeScript conversion. Okay, well, I hope you learned about TypeScript and some of the tooling around it and how you're going to be able to use that going forward. In videos that follow, we're going to be talking about objects and arrays and functions and generics and all of the parts of TypeScript, but we're going to look at them through the lens of this very practical converting to TypeScript mechanism. I'm glad you're here. Hope you're enjoying the ride. Hope you're enjoying these cool locations like this. This is Sisters, Oregon. If you do, hit that subscribe button, click on that bell, and you'll be notified anytime another one of these videos comes out. You can always check up on our Discord server and have a chat with us there. You can hit the comment section right down below here, add your comments and questions. You can sign up for our newsletter and get access to these videos a day earlier than everyone else, which is awesome. In the meantime, of course, be happy, be healthy, and be safe.